Welcome, everyone. Hello, caregivers, veterans, and military families. We are so excited that you're able to join us today for our webinar series, The Caregiver Community Connection. We're going to be kicking things off here in just a moment, and we want to thank you for being part of this series, and we look forward to having a meaningful conversation today. Hello and welcome everyone to the Caregiver Community Connection C3 presented by the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and powered by our partners at Wounded Warrior Project, with special thanks to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs for making this possible. We are so excited that you're able to join us today for this show, a part of our C3 series, and I'm your host, Jennifer McInday, and our moderator today is Jasmine Alfonso. She'll be working behind the scenes and also facilitating our questions and answers. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure to mention to everyone here that we are recording this broadcast for those who couldn't join us live so they can replay today's show. And our goal for today, for this entire series, is to bring military and veteran caregivers engaging content on important topics and really provide opportunities for you to connect with your peers and to find support. Now, today's webinar, A Candid Conversation, sharing our caregiver stories, will feature author, speaker, caregiver, Lee Woodruff, who's also the co-founder of the Bob Woodruff Foundation and a valued partner of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. Now, Lee is also a member of the Federal Advisory Committee, chaired by Senator Elizabeth Dole, that's doing fantastic work for military and veteran caregivers across the country. And I just want to give a shout out to Senator Dole, who's watching with us today. So
Yay.
Welcome, Lee. She's going to share her story, talk to us about writing and how writing and even humor has helped her get through some really challenging times. Hopefully she'll share some lessons that she's learned along the way with a few tips and tricks. And then we're going to have a question and answer session with Lee. So make sure to submit any questions that you have using the Q&A feature in this webinar. And we also want to make sure that you know that all of your chats are able to be seen by our hosts today. So be sure and mind your P's and Q's in there. Now, after our Q&A, Lee is going to share some writing prompts and talk to us about how really anyone can get started using writing and journaling in their life. And also want to make sure that you know we'll follow up today's show with an email to all our registered participants with a link to the replay and information about our future shows. Now, here's some exciting news. We have 4 giveaways for today's show, thanks to our powering sponsor, Wounded Warrior Project, who's provided some very lovely journals. So 4 lucky winners are going to win a journal from Wounded Warrior Project and a $25 Amazon gift card. So we want to thank everybody for participating. We'll let you know who the winners are as we progress through the show. And now I'm delighted to introduce the woman and best-selling author that we've all been waiting to talk to, Lee Woodruff.
Oh, well, gosh. Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction, and for everybody that's taking time out, especially caregivers who do not have a lot of time to do this. So hopefully this is part of your self-care for today, is learning and chatting and talking. And you can go ahead and say bad things about me on the chat. That's okay. I can take it.
You did say that anybody could ask any questions. So that's on the board now. We've left plenty of time today so that you can ask Lee anything. Is that maybe a hashtag ask me anything?
Ask me anything. I feel like if you're going to do this and you're going to talk about your life, you can't hold back, right? Because there's good, bad, and ugly with caregiving, just like in life. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, Lee, you and I have been acquainted for some time because we both live in the brain injury world. And as many of our audience knows, I care for my brother James, who was wounded by an improvised explosive device in Mosul, Iraq in early 2005, and he sustained a brain injury. And you care for someone who also sustained a brain injury in Iraq.
I do. So my husband, Bob, was there not as a member of the military, which is probably the highest honor, but as a journalist covering the war in really what was supposed to be more peacetime. So it was more surprising. And I only say that because he was embedded back in 2003 during the invasion with the Marines. So if something were going to happen, I think I was braced for that, but I was totally not prepared for him to be there during President Bush's State of the Union address. And he was hit by a roadside bomb like your brother. He was outside of the tank and he was reporting, and he was really gravely injured. It's really a miracle that he's alive and that he's recovered so well.
Now, you found the courage to not only care for Bob, raise your young family. I believe you had young twins at the time, but you also managed to turn all of that into a book in an instant.
Well, so before you go putting a cape on me, lady, it's so funny because people are like, how did you do that? Or why did you do that? And that's kind of why you asked me to be on here today. I did not set out to write a book. That thing that became a book was my journal. And so as somebody who has always been a writer and has, that's been sort of my trade, that was my instinct. My very first instinct was, I need to control something. And this is completely out of control, as so many of you know. And so I think my instinct, without thinking about it, was just, could someone please get my laptop from home? I just need to record this. And so as I told Bob the stories of our life, because anybody who's had a brain injury, so Bob was in a coma for 36 days, and all of the nurses at Bethesda said, just keep talking to him, tell him stories. It's going to connect his brain. Somewhere in there, he hears you. And I really took that to heart. So I would sit by his bed and tell him the story of our life. And I also knew that two things. If he died, I knew that my children would want to know what had happened. And all of you know that life in an ICU is 99 miles an hour. You don't remember a darn thing. And I knew that if he woke up as a journalist, he would be desperate to know, tell me what happened and then what happened. So I just started writing it. And ultimately I ended up a year later with, 800 pages of something. And that was ultimately what became the book. And the last thing I'll say about that is Dr. Rocco Armanda, who's an incredible surgeon, he was at Bethesda for years, a neurosurgeon, been deployed to Iraq 3 times. He said to me, I understand that you're a writer. And this was 2006. He said, somebody needs to write a story about what's happening to our young men and women in these hospitals, because nobody out there has any idea. And this was before the perfect storm of sort of the horrible stuff happening in the VA hospitals and all of that. And I heard that. I thought, oh gosh, you know what? We have a voice right now. I need to do something with that, because these kids are all in here and none of us know that out in America.
I think for my co-author, Patty Donahue, who is on the call today and is a member of our Hidden Heroes Caregiver group, for Patty and I, when we wrote our book, it was really the same thing. We just wanted folks to know what families were going through, what deployment was like, and the great sacrifices that so many of our Americans have made in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, and journalists as well. There was a journalist embedded with my brother's unit, and they're still in contact with him, very, very fond member of their family. So
yeah,
it takes a lot of guts to do that.
There are so many great stories, and I won't take time on that, but I just remember vividly when the embed was going to happen, and just the reaction of most of the military, because Bob had been covering wars for a while, and they were like, really? We're going to have the back of this fat smoker from, Newsweek or something? Like, seriously, it's not enough that we have to take care of our own men. And the stories that came out of that, the guys having babies, and the journalists would hand them their phone with unlimited hours and call home, it was a great moment for the confluence of the two.
So wonderful. Now, besides all these amazing things I already mentioned that you do, you're very involved in the caregiving world. I mean, it's you didn't just get Bob through the tough times and raise your family, but you really embraced other caregivers. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Well, having lived through it like everybody on this call, probably in some way, shape, or form, you realize, and this is, of course, the impetus for Senator Dole and to found the foundation, you realize that there's a person who's normally left out of the equation. So you've got the parade and you've got the hero, but there's somebody behind them with the oxygen and the oxygen mask, as we all know. And it was really obvious from my experience, especially meeting so many of the wives and sisters and mothers in the military hospitals, that very little attention was being paid to the people that made the world go round for everyone. So it's very important for me at the Bob Woodruff Foundation that part of our emphasis is on focusing on the caregivers.
Now, I would like to talk a little bit about the Bob Woodruff Foundation, very near and dear to my heart. I know you're really a cutting edge. It's an innovative organization that has been involved in a number of areas that have not only benefited veterans and members of the military, but also their families, their spouses, their caregivers. Could you just talk a little bit about maybe some of the advocacy that you were able to do in support of IVF and you know, other effects on families from this war?
Bob and I were in a unique position as two journalists or people who were out there speaking and traveling the country, and we realized we needed to do something with this. We made a promise that if Bob woke up, we would do something with our voice. And his brothers and I sort of made that pact over his bed. And we, you know, really recognized early on we had no expertise. We were not home builders, or, you know, maybe we could pack a backpack, but obviously the needs in the war morphed. No one knew it would go on for as long as it has. So what we decided we did have was a great eye on the landscape by traveling around to lots of towns and speaking and talking or reporting. And we could look at everything out there, connect people, connect with people, connect organizations, and also sort of look at best practices and raise money and turn that money back to the boots on the ground that were doing the real work. There was no reason to reinvent the wheel. And that's how the foundation started. But one of the things I am most proud of is our Viva program, which, as you said, is looking at what needs weren't covered. And for the families who had been injured and were unable to start a family because of those injuries, as you well know, there was a big disparity in active duty and veteran benefits. So we wanted to close that gap. We did a convening on fertility and intimacy, which is also something we just don't talk enough about in caregiving and in this space. Relationships change. You can feel like somebody's mother instead of their wife or girlfriend. And those are shameful things to talk about. And so I feel very strongly that we need to have these conversations. And we started a fund to allow families who wanted to apply and go through in vitro to help create that, make that happen monetarily.
Well, that's just, it's fantastic that you think so broadly and yet so deeply with your work through the foundation and all the lives that you've touched. I know many of those folks that you've helped are on the call today, and I know they would want me to thank you on their behalf for all of those efforts. Now,
can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
So we, the foundation, had our sixth baby born through the program. So yeah, 6 babies, mostly girls. I think it's 5 girls and 1 boy. Ooh. And I may actually have the number off because something else may be cooking. But it's so incredible. We get sent these pictures, and it's like, here's another baby that, you know, came into the world and made this family happy. So that's the most meaningful thing.
It's really about giving others hope when their hope is running low, and that's really what caregiving is about. It's taking our hope and offering it to someone else to help get them through their tough times. Now, you have talked a little bit about your writing. You're really modest about that because you have 2 other books, Perfectly Imperfect and Those We Love Most, which is a really touching work on so many levels. But you're also a public speaker. Now, I imagine you're not doing much of that right now.
I am not. I think we've all been grounded, and it's just so weird. I was laughing and joking with Jennifer and the gals before we went on that I literally jumped in the shower, washed my hair. It's still wet, gals. Is that not a caregiver or what? But I put makeup on for the first time. So I'm looking at myself going, who is that? And my husband just told me I looked like Tales from the Crypt because I have the wrong color foundation on. But you know how everybody says you need to do self-care and get dressed up every day? Forget it. I think I just put on a pair of jeans for the first time last week. But I'm going to say right now, there was something nice about putting a face of makeup on. So those little moments right now in COVID, as we're quarantined, are small things that we know we're supposed to do as caregivers, and we don't necessarily take the time to do. I don't even remember what your question was. I'm not sure why I got started on that, but I just wanted to tell you that I have eyebrows right now, and I'm really happy about that.
Well, our lives have all changed, and I think for caregivers, especially like you and I, who've cared for somebody who was wounded, and it wasn't something we could have predicted, and we had to have an immediate reaction. I've actually been feeling some of those same feelings that I had early on in caregiving, that, immediate change of lifestyle, different requirements of my time, new responsibilities that I didn't have before, all while feeling honestly a bit anxious and confused and worried. And I think today's episode, talking about journaling, talking about writing, can help so many people. And I see in the chat, people are saying, yes, that's how I've been feeling. When I was a young girl, my grandmother started me on journaling. Oh, wow. To help me just deal with some problems in my life. And I remember that she said, you need to write something down every day, even if nobody reads it, because writing things down helps us make sense of it all.
So true. It's also control, which I realized way later. But as I sort of alluded to before, nothing in my life about having a husband in a coma and 4 kids up in New York I had any control over. And so writing was the one place where I could tell the story my way. This was my story. And on that little laptop at night was the only place that I had control. There's a scene that took place in the book in an instant, which is kind of hysterical, and I'll super compress it, but it spoke to the control moment. And so just to jump ahead for a minute, for any of you who have those moments of humor or those small moments and you're not sure that they're worthy to tell if you're writing something longer, or just, those are kind of the moments that can be jewels in the book. And this was my really expensive face cream. So we were moving hotels. We were staying in a hotel near Bethesda, and we were transferring rooms or hotels or something. And my sweet mother-in-law, Bob's mom, decided to pack up my stuff for me. And she had stuck my cream in a little zipper pocket I never would have looked at. So all I knew is that I could not find my cream, and somehow it was lost. And man, I ripped that whole hotel apart. We had hotel security looking through the trash. And I realized later that was just all about having control. Like finding the face cream meant that you were in control of one small thing in your life. So I don't know if any of you have experienced that as well, but that became a moment of humor that I would use later.
Well, I think using humor as a coping tactic it's something that gets me through the day, and it's something I have to remind myself to look for. Look for the little things that can give you some air, give you a chance to breathe. We've got some folks mentioning that they put on makeup for today's show too, and they're not even on the video.
Oh man, I love that. Well, I'm going to do this again, I'm going to say, because it did feel good.
It really does. Now, I want to get into writing and talk to you more about what your tips and tricks are and what our audience can do. But before we get to that, we promised to answer some questions. So I'm going to ask our friend Jasmine to rejoin us, as Jasmine's been monitoring the chat. And I also want to let you know that our audience members are thanking you for being here and just sharing with them. It's so sweet.
That is so sweet. Oh, cleaning. Someone's using cleaning. Melissa, cleaning. I did 5 hours in my kitchen the other day. It felt really good. Yeah. That's
well, absolutely. And I put on makeup today too, full disclosure. So thank you, Lee, for forcing me to have to do that and to actually brush my hair. So thank you.
You look good.
Thank you. So starting off with some great questions here. The first one comes in. There are times when it feels appropriate to share details of the challenging parts of caregiving, but I also feel a need to protect my husband's privacy. Specifics could help another caregiver in many ways, but those same specifics could make my husband feel exposed or embarrassed. How do you walk the line in sharing your story, and especially in writing it or blogging?
I love this question. And a million years ago, when blogging just started, I was invited to a conference of women's magazine mommy bloggers. And one of the things I said to them was, you know, you guys are all out there writing about your child's explosive diarrhea, and that child's going to grow up at some point and go, really, mom? Like, you know, did you have agency to tell my story? So I love that question, because you have to think about what are the things. So for example, I had my in-laws living with me for the 6 weeks that Bob was in the hospital. So we were in hotel rooms right next to each other. I love my in-laws, but they couldn't get the notion that the key they had to my room, that maybe they should knock first. So I would be like changing and in my panties, and in would, you know, bustle my father-in-law. And in my first version of my story, I had all that sort of anger moments at that. And then when I went through it again and thought, what is this going to accomplish? Number one. And number two, you never be careful to always preserve someone's dignity, because that will live forever. A book will come and go, and your relationships with people will live forever. So the dignity question is such a great one, because I think you have to find a way that you're comfortable. For example, and Senator Dole, if you're listening, I think you'll resonate with this, especially because you're a Southern lady. And I mean that in the most wonderful sense of the word, like my mom. So my thing about writing is I would never use a swear word, or never write anything that my mom wouldn't be proud to share with her friends. And I think then you need to sort of use that gauge about caregiving and find a way to talk about it, whether you use an anecdote or you use another example, or you make it about you. So you tell the hard things, but it's from your eyes. It doesn't denigrate the other person. So I guess all that long answer to say, keep the story focused on what were your emotions? What did you see? And how did it impact you? And in that way, it's just so much safer.
It really is. Jasmine, should we pause and give away one of our prizes while we reflect on
Yes.
never writing anything that we don't want our grandma to read, and
Yes.
telling
Let's
our
pause.
story instead of someone else?
Absolutely. I also launched the poll. So Lee, we have a poll going right now. The first question is, and I'll announce the results after, but our first question is, how has writing down your thoughts ever helped you deal with something difficult in your life? So yes or no. And then the second poll question is, did you ever write in a diary when you were a kid or as an adult? So we'll be closing that poll at the end of the question and answers, and we'll see where the group lies. So for our giveaway prizes, the first winner for today, we have two winners here. We have Maggie Bristol is going to be our first winner. I will connect with you through the chat. And our second winner is going to be Claire Marie Lundberg. So thank you so much for participating. We're going to have two more winners. I will reach out in the chats. Our next question now is here, and it says, yes, I've had a tremendous amount of loss at this very early stage of my life. I just had recent ones. I lost my Master Sergeant uncle of 22 years and my 24-year-old veteran cousin and two others outside of my family. I am looking to ways of incorporating writing to push through all of this.
I can't think of it. I'm so sorry for all those losses. That's a lot of loss piled on top of one another at a really hard time where we can't congregate and grieve together. So I'm sorry to hear that. I can't think of a better thing to do than write. And I know we're going to have some time in a bit to get into some of those tactics on how to start or where to start. But if you don't, so many people say to me, but I'm not really a good writer, or I'm not a writer, and I always say, if you are approaching this thinking that you're going to be the next James Patterson, you're never going to put a word on the page. This is writing as a form of therapy, and it's a tried and true way to work through things. And it just simply feels good to create something. I was reading a book recently, and the thought struck me, and it's not novel, but Jennifer, going back to, all of you trying to put all these super, accomplishments together in one sentence for me, which never makes me feel, I feel like we do what we need to do to survive. And I feel like I love it when people say, I can't believe that you did all that. I never could have done it. And I feel like, well, what's the alternative? A bottle of Jack Daniels and some Valium. Like, I had 4 little kids to show that, life is going to go on no matter how your father comes back. And I feel like the same is sort of true of trauma, that you pick the things up after trauma that help you. And so in the case of, our foundation, your foundation, you do something that helps somebody else, and that is its own form of healing yourself. And writing is the same thing. You don't have to go create a foundation. You don't have to go, to a hospital and visit 200 people. You can write something, you can share it or not, but moving forward and putting those thoughts down on paper is a form of taking a step forward. So if you can get that done, and that will help you. And again, I'm so sorry about that.
Thank you, Lee. Our next question, we're getting quite a few questions on here, so we have about 8 more. And some of these I think you may be able to answer during the writing exercise.
Okay.
The next one is, there are moments when your story sharing slows down due to life. How do you get back and keep your story fresh?
That's a great question.
A really great question. You're looking at a gal who hasn't published a book in a bunch of years, and I've tried and I've failed. I've written 3 things that didn't quite work. I'm working on something now, and it's super hard to focus on that. So I think if you can look at what you're writing in bite-sized chunks, and then it's not like, oh my God, I have to go back to my book, or I have to go back to my entire life story. Look at it as, I'm going to go back to the first time I went to the zoo with my uncle. And if you can take it in little bits like that, I think that it feels less daunting. Because of course, if the caregivers on this phone aren't going to have 24, 48-hour periods to just go tuck in and write. That's not how it works. So I think little bits, little baby steps of writing.
That's great advice. Okay, great. Our next question, I will say there is one question in here. How can we connect caregivers to your initiatives, Lee, and what you're working on? And we're going to leave some time for you, Lee, at the end to share your social media handles, anything you're working on and ways they can connect. So I'll leave that one for later on, but we will get to that question. The next one is, I'm always concerned about putting my feelings on paper for fear of someone else reading it. How do I get past that to get started?
I think you need a really good password on your laptop that no one else knows. I guess you have to ask yourself too, what would be the worst thing that would happen if somebody read it, and who would that person be? And would that spark maybe an important conversation? Would it be hurtful? Or would you also be able to say, these are my sister, who survived a brain tumor and a husband who went through some really hard health issues, was writing something, and she actually wrote something about dying, and her husband happened to read it on the computer, and he got really upset, and she said, you're not allowed to read that, number one, and number two, this is just the deep black hole where I dump all my dark thoughts, so those aren't available to you. This is how I get up every day and do what I need to do. And that was her answer, and it worked. So I think we all need a deep dark hole to go yell something in and then cover back over again, and that's on us. And if someone stumbles into that hole, then maybe, do we owe that person an explanation? I guess it depends on who the person is and what your relationship is with them. But we all have to put it somewhere.
I also think there can be some cathartic benefit to sharing what you wrote when you're ready, and when you're able, maybe small bite-sized chunks.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, one of our next question is, how do I even find the time as a caregiver to begin writing?
Yeah. How do you find the time to put makeup on as a caregiver? That's hard. I find my body changing. I will, not ashamed to say it, tomorrow I will turn 60 years old, gals. Tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And 10 years ago, I had the energy to wake up and write at 5 in the morning. I cannot do that anymore. My body's changing. My biorhythms are changing. So I steal time when I can, and I unhook from Wi-Fi to do it. But I think so much of that depends on, are you a morning person? Are you a night person, which I never have been? And it's a really personal thing. The other thing you could do is set a clock for an hour and just go unhook from the Wi-Fi, because that's the deadliest demon, right? An email comes in and you see it and you go, oh, I'll just go answer this. Can't do that. John Grisham writes in a computer that's 20 years old that's not connected to Wi-Fi out in the garden shed. And that's how he gets it done, 3 hours every day. I know caregivers can't take 3 hours, but find your 1 hour. Find a way to just get it done. And there's a whole thing about writing that says you just have to wake up and write every day, even if it stinks and it's not good. I don't think caregivers can do that. And I think we need to forgive ourselves if we're not writing every day.
Great. Thank you so much, Lee. Another question here. I believe there are many caregivers like myself who had several EDF events or other events canceled due to COVID. How have you adjusted to the new normal regarding your work and professional engagements? Additionally, what avenues have you used to promote your passions and your work given COVID?
It's been a real switch for all of us, isn't it? A lot of my work, my sort of day job stuff, the speaking has just gone. So I assume at some point that will come back. I know some speakers and conferences and things, and I don't know what you all are experiencing, but a lot of that it's migrating to Zoom, and there's just a screen fatigue. There's nothing like being in person, and I really do hope that at some point we can all convene again, because there's such a benefit to that. But in the absence of that, I think I'm just hoping that we're around the corner from a moment when we can get back together again. So maybe I'm dreaming right now, but I keep thinking this is temporary, this is temporary. It's way more challenging though. So as someone who has 6 people home in this house, and I was laughing with Jennifer and Jasmine and everybody before, I'm cooking and cleaning more than oh my gosh, it's eating into my day. So that is really the big challenge as well. I thought oh wow, it's like a snow day, I'll have all this time. Heck no, it's the exact opposite.
I have 20 Zooms this week, 20. And I'm sure there are many people joining us today that have more. I think for me, because I am a lifelong journaler, finding that time to write something down has been a challenge. But I'm going to take a nod from you today and not force myself, but look for the places where I can fit in 30 minutes, an hour, because I think that we need to be writing about what we're going through right now.
Yes, we do. We do. And actually, I write in my diary and say 9 to 11 writing time. Now, sometimes I encroach on that, but at least if I put it down, it's my objective. It's my intention. And we got to forgive ourselves when the intention doesn't work out that way, when somebody needs us or the morning changes because of our duties. But it feels kind of good to be like, yeah, I'm going to make a plan that for 2 hours, it's just going to be about what I want to write.
Just book an appointment with yourself. I love it.
Yeah.
Jasmine, do we have any more questions coming in from the Q&A?
We are getting a lot more questions. I'm going to do 2 more, and then I think we can move to the writing exercise, and hopefully we'll have time to answer some more at the end. The next question is going to be, I would love some tips and tricks for making our story meaningful for someone else to read or to hear without sounding like it's an outlet or making it seem like to get venting anger or to gain sympathy from others. Some caregivers are very skilled at that, but sometimes a story, including my own, can come off as petty or pull more than just a story. How to reflect that to your readers and keep that in mind and make your story relevant?
Ooh, love that one. So a couple thoughts swirling around in my head as you say that. One thought is there's a difference between your story and your angry emotions where you're just pissed off at the world because of everything that's happened. So I think the angry part of us that exists in all of us, myself included, when I feel ripped off, is a letter that you write to yourself, and you put all your ugly, or you write to the person that you're caregiving perhaps, and you put all your ugly emotions there. I hate it when you do this. I don't feel like, telling you to take your meds one more time. If I have to tell you to drink water and hydrate yourself for your damn brain injury, whoops, sorry, Senator Dole, I promised I wasn't going to swear, and I just did. So that's one form of writing that I think is super cathartic. I've opened letters and just worked on them, and that's my angry letter. The other thing you're talking about is your story. And one of the things that I tell people, I just had somebody send me she wanted to write her memoir. She was just recovering from addiction. And she sent me 19 pages of what she'd written. And it really felt like a diary. First I went here, then I went here, then I lifted 5 pounds, and I started getting back in shape. And I said, this is a journal. And the difference between a story that Jennifer or Jasmine wants to read is it has your emotion in it. So if you're going to tell that story, it can't just be a sequence of your events. You have to put yourself in it. How are you feeling? When your husband dropped you off at rehab, what was he wearing? What was the look on his face when he gave you a kiss? You can feel he's angry. He's burning with anger. You're about to go lock yourself into a treatment facility for 2 weeks, and you've been drinking on the sly. You're leaving him with 3 kids. What are you feeling? What does it feel like when he takes your cell phone? So some of that is just the ability to then you're listening, right? But if I just say to you, I went to the store, I bought broccoli, and then I saw the wine bottle, I bought it, I put it in that's not a story. So those are really nuanced things. But I also say, just read, if you're writing your memoir, what are some of the great memoirs? And I wrote some of them down we can talk about later. But when I write, I like to saturate myself with other good stories, words and everything else, because that kind of fires me up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And show, don't tell. So, what did it feel like? What did you taste? Did you smell? With the wind on your face? I learned some things about that through one of our partners, Wounded Warrior Project, has provided writing workshops over the years for their warriors and for caregivers. And I was very blessed to be able to participate in one of those workshops with the Writers Guild Initiative in New York City, and learned a lot about showing, not telling. That's exceptional advice.
And
That's
staying
great.
in the scene, right? Staying there for a while, for a number of paragraphs. It's not boring. You're just fixing us in the story when you do that.
Yes, we appreciate that. I want to be conscious of time, so I know everyone's eager to get to the writing activity. Those who submitted questions, we have over 16. A lot of them have to do with the writing exercise, so I'm going to move on to that. Just want to end with our first poll. It seems 94% of you said yes to having writing down your thoughts has helped through a difficult time. And then our second question, did you write in a diary as a kid or adult? And 86% of you have.
Wow.
So now I will let Lee go ahead and take it away with this activity that I know you all are eager to get with, so that we have enough time for that.
I'm trying to follow the chats too, and they're so wonderful. And I just want to touch on 2 chats that I feel like are also part of this. One is from Sandy, when she's talking about her husband was more receptive when she read him something she wrote. That is such an amazing way to communicate and such a great thing to do. And I was going through therapy with my sisters a bunch of years ago, just issues that we were all grappling with together. And we went with a wonderful woman who helped us sort of work through conversations. And we all wrote our stories as an animal. Honest to God, I know that sounds silly, but that is a form of therapy too, is tell your story. So we were 3 bears, we're 3 sisters. But it was so helpful to remove it from, well, Lee did this and then Nancy did this. We were 3 bears and we told the story in that way. So I applaud you for that. That's a wonderful way to use writing to communicate and enrich a relationship. And then to the person who wrote about, she doesn't think her story is as interesting. How do I make, Lisa, because her veteran wasn't injured, but is an aging veteran. Tell us the story of his life. Go back and forth in time. Tell us, how you met. Tell us what his life was like as a young man. A story doesn't have to be, 50 Shades of Grey. Thank goodness, right? Some of the best stories in the world, one of my all-time favorite books, if I was marooned on a desert island, is a story called Crossing to Safety by Wallace Stegner. And it is just a simple story about friendship, marriage, and love through time between 2 couples. There are no swear words, no aliens, no, murders, suicides. It's just about life. And those are some of the best stories ever written.
Well,
So,
for our audience, I want to make sure we're keeping track of all of Lee's recommendations. Yep. So we'll be sure and follow up with those in our Hidden Heroes caregiver community so that we don't miss any of those, because Lee, we know that you are a voracious reader. So we're looking forward to hearing more recommendations from you.
All right. So Jasmine teed it up and I went off script, ladies. So now I'm back. And so when we say an exercise, I was going to just sort of give some signposting because I know we don't have time to actually sit and write the answers, but I'm going to give you some things in our time left to think about, take notes down as they may or may not apply to you. But this is sort of how other people who are writers do this, or thoughts that I had about it. And I think the very first thing is, you are just right. Just picture this as writing for you. If you're thinking about anything more momentous or like I've got to write a book like Jennifer did and stuff, that's going to become a barrier in a way, because writing is like laying bricks. It's one stone at a time. And think about those little chunks as we talked about. So things to really help you start thinking about it. Let's talk about your present day, let's say. So what are you feeling now? Writing about emotions, which is hard for a lot of us because we bottle a lot of things up. So being able to take this moment, maybe some of the exercises that can start focusing you on what you want to write if it's something longer, is writing about what you're feeling just in today. Maybe you just had some interaction with a loved one or family member. Maybe you did something wonderful like I did this morning. I got out and took a walk with a girlfriend, and that just got juices flowing. So do a couple paragraphs on one small thing and kind of start exercising that writing muscle. I told you my story that my sisters would kill me about going through therapy and writing about ourselves as bears. But honestly, that's a wonderful conceit for telling your story, especially for some of you who've been chatting about how hard it is sometimes to write about your husband, or your husband doesn't want you to share those things. I mean, people often say to me, why don't you write a second book? In an Instant kind of ends with Bob, just starting to get better. And I don't know that I'll ever be able to write that second book, guys. And the honest answer is I'm not sure that I could write as honestly as I wanted to and preserve Bob's dignity. So whoever asked that question before, it is such a valid one that I've wrestled with, because I don't want to write what I call a Suzanne Summers ab master book. Like, yeah, all I did was get in this machine and I had like abs like a rock star. We all know that is not what this journey looks like. It's got warts all over it. It's got intimate moments. It's got moments where we want to walk out the door and go, you know what? Do this yourself. I'm done. I didn't sign up for this. And I have not, just so you feel better, I have not figured out a way to write that, to really share something that's important enough for someone to read, and to be okay with Bob being okay with it. I don't know the answer there, ladies. So that's why it's back on the focus on us. So another thought I had is, what's your happy place? For me, it's up on a lake in the Adirondacks where I grew up as a kid. So there's a raft and there's a point that I swim to, and I could do a couple paragraphs on that, and that will probably release some really good serotonin. So I feel like that's another thing on a bad day. What's your happy place or your happy memory? Take time and do 3 paragraphs on that as sort of a warm up. The other thing is to go to the hardest, most awful thing about your life, because the thing about humor, and gallows humor in particular, is when we can laugh at the thing that's really scary or write about it. And Jennifer, this is what you did as well. You put that thing in a box. You take its power away from you when you can call it out, write about it, name it, laugh at it a little bit. So take the most traumatic, the moment you got the phone call, the moment you got the diagnosis, whatever that is, take that moment and write about that. I think that will just release all the toxins that caregivers know they have to hold inside for everybody. I have 2 college twins, and a 29-year-old and a 26-year-old. Every single one of them is unemployed right now. And then there's my husband, who's a reporter and is quarantined like everybody else. In this house right now, I am carrying everybody's emotional weight and sadness right here, like I know so many of you are, because we don't have a timeline on this. Human beings are not good with uncertainty. And no one has been able to say, you got 2 more months and then you're free. So this is hard. And if those things are weighing you down in COVID, as Jennifer said, write about what's happening right now. We are all anxious on some level. So what are you feeling? What are you seeing around your house? Who are you mad at? If somebody leaves a cupboard door open one more time and you're ready to pick a baseball bat up, write about it instead of hitting them. All of these things are helpful. So how do you start writing? I have a term that I love, and it's called the vomit system. The vomit system is, we don't worry about grammar. We don't worry about spelling. We just vomit it onto the page, because the hardest thing to do is to start. To me, it's so much fun to go back later and edit, polish, tinker. Those are great things to do in a 30-minute block of time. But writing, Jennifer, you can back me up here. Writing from scratch, hardest thing in the world to do. So just put it on the page. Don't have to make it perfect. Do you have anything you want to add here?
I know you use a little laptop. I'm a hand writer. And then I take those 30-minute breaks, or even sitting in a waiting room, or waiting for my brother to finish doing something, and then he needs me after. I take those breaks to do the polishing, to transfer it to my computer, and then somehow reading it and typing it back to myself gives me a chance to reflect a little bit. I can almost feel the adrenaline releasing, probably that serotonin uplift that you were talking about. So pen to paper for me.
Yeah, no, there are times I do that as well. Just so we were also talking before about what we've gotten into in COVID quarantine, and Jennifer was saying that she's been embroidering. And I feel like writing is the same thing. With embroidery or knitting, you're creating something, and there's a real wonderful calm that comes over you when you create something. Writing can be the very same way. It can also be really frustrating too, there's no question. But just the act of creating something is a calming thing. So you vomited it all out there. You're not worried about grammar, spelling, whatever. Other thoughts on that once you begin pruning and shaping and editing? I always say overwrite. It's so much easier to chop away and edit down than it is to not have enough. So even if you don't think you're going to end up putting that piece in, put it down there because it may have a use somewhere else. And there's an old phrase in writing called widows and orphans. And we tend to fall in love with the little widows and orphans that we write. And oftentimes that's what makes us the worst editors of ourselves, because we love the way we just phrased that, or we love that little analogy we used. But if it really doesn't belong, you don't have to cut it. Just put it at the end of the document, because you may find a place to put it somewhere else. And that's one way to kind of get past the barrier of feeling like you're stuck on the words.
We had one of our participants reword that thought. He said, pre-write, free write, and then rewrite.
Love it.
That's really easy to remember. I love that advice.
I love that too. I'm going to write that down. That's really good. Go in chapters. Scope out your chapters first. Outline if that feels good, but don't be afraid to break the rules or not follow the chapters that you've chosen. Start in the middle of your story. Use time fluidly. So just like the woman who asked the question about her veteran husband who's just simply getting older, there's a real conceit now in fiction about going back and forth in time. So it's the past, and then the next chapter is the present. And that's kind of a wonderful way to do things as well. I always find 2 or 3 people that I call friendly first readers. And those are people who are willing to read my work and give me an honest assessment. And I know it's delivered in love, because it's the most vulnerable thing in the world to do, to write your story and to then have somebody sort of talk about it or pick it apart. So find people whose opinion. Did you do that with your book, Jennifer?
We did. Patty and we spent an hour a week together on Saturday mornings before anybody got up, before anybody started opening cupboards and leaving them open. We were accountability partners for our writing, and it was delightful. We had a shared experience, but obviously everyone's emotions are their own, and everybody's memory is their own. And so it was nice to be able to have someone read my thoughts and tell me exactly what they were thinking as they read it, and give me some direction. And a little bit easier when somebody else says, I think that sentence can come out.
Yeah. And usually they're looking at it from just a couple clicks back. So that's usually probably pretty good advice. Write just for you. I think for everybody who's contacted me and said, I want to write a book. And I think I said this before, so sorry if I'm repeating it, but my answer is always don't start out thinking you're going to write a book, because that's going to be a fail. And that's an awful lot to put on your shoulders. Just write, just start writing and write for yourself. There are no rules. And so I was talking to somebody yesterday who is a military caregiver, and she was saying, I don't know where to start. And I said, why don't you just start by writing? She said, there have been so many wonderful moments about being a military caregiver, and so many moments that I just want to scream. And I said, so that's your lead sentence for right now. Some of my happiest moments have been being connected to the military, and some of my most unhappy moments. And then just take it from there. Start writing. You can start with a specific scene. If you think about the way a lot of books that you love start, they probably start with a small moment rather than, it was a dark and stormy night, like Peanuts. One small moment where that turns the story, and then you can pull back and tell the backstory. But that's a way to get into what you want to write. And And we talked about writing some of your deepest thoughts or emotions, the things you don't want to say out loud. And again, that's going to go back to having a really good password on your laptop if you don't want anybody to read it, or hiding it in the hollowed out Bible somewhere in the living room when you printed it out. Worry about organization, I say later. Like at some point you are going to have to organize it. But I think when you start getting into the habit of writing, as Jennifer was talking about, waking up early. And I used to love setting my alarm to wake up when I felt like I was in what writers call the flow and things were really coming. There's you can't wait to hop out of bed and get to it.
There was also something about the tempo of it. Saturday's coming, or I could get excited about it on Monday or Tuesday. I didn't have to worry about it because I had several days left. And we made an appointment with ourselves, which was your advice, and it worked perfectly. So I have to say that flow can sometimes come from the regularity of making it a habit for yourself.
Yep. And that's the old writer's credo. So just sit down every day. Doesn't matter what you get on the page, just get into the practice of it, like a habit, like a skill. Some thoughts for just getting going: interview family and friends, get their perspective on sort of the what happened stuff to add to yours, or if that you just want to use this interview technique with somebody, the sort of journalist technique, as a way to kind of get writing. And as Jennifer did, maybe you write it by hand and then type it up, because there's something about that embeds it and gets you flowing. Photographs can jog memory, or for all of you who answered the poll about journaling, go back and look at your journals during that time. And maybe there are parts that you can lift. Maybe you want to start typing them up if you weren't a typing journal person. So those are all ways to kind of get into the flow and thinking. Another great thing is to start recording your story on your iPhone. You don't have to write, right? For a lot of people, and especially if there's so much technology that can help us now, just dictating into our laptops or cell phones, start it that way, talk it through.
As speakers, you and I both know that the best way to improve your speaking is to record yourself and listen to it. And so if that's what gets you flowing for writing, I still like to see words on paper, but listening to your story can really help open the floodgates. Lee, I want to let you know we've got another poll up for our audience. This engagement is fantastic, and we have so many questions still coming in. It's hard to believe, but we're asking folks now, have they been reading and writing more or less during the quarantine? And also, if they're finding it difficult to write down their feelings. Sometimes it can be easy to write down the who, what, where, when, and that why part is really hard.
It is.
So we're asking in the polls and hoping that you have a little bit more direction for us as to getting that story out.
I do. I've got a few more things to say. We talked about reading a lot, some of the memoir-y kinds of books, and also humory ones. I'm sure many of these are ones Running with Scissors is just sort of a crazy family story. I love Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. Anything by David Sedaris. I don't know if you guys have read his humorist books, but he is laugh out loud funny. And those can all get juices flowing to do that. I'm going to put a plug in for a friend of mine who is one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. Her name is Laura Munson. And if you Google it, I think it's Haven Writing Retreat. She does writers retreats for people telling their stories in Montana. She's just a fabulous writer, and she helps guide people. But because of COVID right now, she can't hold her workshop. So she's working with people online, super discounted prices and so forth. So just give her a ping. And she is such a love. She's probably just say, oh, I'll hop on the phone with you for a little bit and help you figure out what you need. And, somebody like that who works with people and is able to elicit memoir type stuff. If you're really serious about writing something more, longer form, look to some of those folks who can help you frame it up.
I think that's important. If you don't have an accountability partner, find a mentor, find a workshop. There's no better time than to take an on-demand workshop. And there are also a number of free creative writing and nonfiction writing courses available on Coursera, which I love, and very easy to access those in your spare time right now when your kids are done using the internet for homeschooling, and when your partner is done with their 5 Zooms a day.
There's also, I think, those master class things. I've not done one, but I see those pop up on social media and I don't know what the cost is or any of that, but great point. There's so much online that you can avail yourselves of.
Um, one more question that we had from the chat room, just a little bit about your history. What started your love of writing? What got you into journaling?
Um, my mom was a super literate woman. She's a stay-at-home mom, but one of the smartest people I know. She loved books. So every afternoon we would all curl up as readers. And I just wrote little stories as a girl, little silly, stupid little stories, but I always thought I'd be a writer. If you had told me that my first book would be about me and my husband, I would have probably had you committed to an insane asylum, because I would not have imagined who would have ever cared about my life. But I had always made my living as a freelance writer. I wrote a lot of magazine articles, essays, all that stuff, and figured I would write my first book when the kids left the house, because I figured it was such an enormous task. And I look back now and I have no idea how I wrote those books with young kids and work still like a paycheck job. I think you just do kind of that's the beauty of the fuel behind feeling like you really have something to write. And I hope you all get to feel that at some point in time, because it's a wonderful feeling. It's spilling out of you.
Well, thank you for that. Sometimes, it's if you know the root of someone's success, then you can find that root in yourself. Jasmine, do we have time for one more question for Lee before we head into our final winners and then closing out for today?
Yes, we do. So Lee, one question that came up that I think is really great, given quarantine and how many parents are with their kids at home right now trying to entertain them as well. But one of our participants writes in and says, I would love to learn more about how to incorporate simple ways to help my children write about their experiences, specifically with dealing with invisible wounds like TBI and PTSD in the home. What can they be doing in quarantine?
Well, that's a great story. A great question. I wonder if you could find some ways to guide them through with prompt questions. And maybe that's a place. I remember my babies were in kindergarten when Bob was injured, and the neuropsychologist at Bethesda Naval was waiting to figure out what was the right time for the girls to see their dad in a coma, because we just kept thinking he would wake up. And she used pictures she realized they both wanted a dog, which 14 years later, I'm stuck walking, by the way, picking up. Don't do that, ladies. All right. Don't add that to your plate. But she used pictures of puppies and started asking them questions about puppies to talk in a way that she could figure out their level of empathy, what they were feeling, their emotions. So I wonder if there's a way to do that depending on the level of the kids, to get them to write a story. We talked about my bear story with my sisters earlier, but maybe they tell their story and she starts it. So one of the conceits that can happen is mommy starts the story, and it's about the daddy bear who goes out in the world, and he's a wonderful fighter and a daddy and a loving daddy, but he comes home and his paw is hurt. And then maybe you pass that to the child. It's probably, I'm mixing therapy with writing, but writing is therapy. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a way to tell the story using, other archetypes, and the child feels safe to crawl into that and finish the story. But I've also used that with my kids, the pass around story. I'm going to start it. Now you take the next part. Then the next child takes the next part. That might be interesting as well to get the emotions out.
What great ideas for our military families who are listening. And, that's a big initiative for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, is supporting caregivers and their families, and caregivers who have children, and also important to our partners at Wounded Warrior Project and the Department of Veterans Affairs. So we appreciate that very much. We may need to have another episode where we explore.
Let's do it. Do I have to wear makeup? All right, I will.
Well,
no, I do want to give a shout out for one thing, because it sounds like we have a lot of readers, and I do, just because I love it, I do a monthly book blog of book recommendations, and it's just leewoodruff.com. So if you just hit the subscribe button, you will get it into your inbox every month. And I had so many people ask me what to read during quarantine that I put together two ago. One's about to drop, so it's probably up there now on leewoodruff.com, the homepage, my most beloved books ever. So it's a list of my all-time favorite books. And if those are helpful, the other quick rec I have, and I know we're almost out of time, there's some great books on writing. So Stephen King wrote a book called On Writing, which is amazing. Stephen King, the horror writer, a famous writing book. The other one, Annie Lamott, who is one of my favorite writers, Lamott, wrote a book called Bird by Bird, and it's about writing your story. So some of those writing books are just fabulous. They're really helpful.
There are very few published authors that I know who haven't read Bird by Bird. So anybody who is thinking, I really want to publish my book, get Bird by Bird. I promise you, it'll be worth it. Also, I want to just say, sign up for leewoodruff.com's newsletter, for your newsletter, because I got something really interesting about a month ago. It was your tips for presenting your best self virtually. I have seen it passed around LinkedIn and different coworkers, and it helped me so much. And I just want to say thank you for that. And that's just one of the cool things that you're offering is just little tips, little tricks to help us get through the day.
Yeah. Well, this is a great podcast. I'm all in on this, ladies and men. And look at this team.
Well, I know we're getting short on time here, Lee, but I just want to announce the poll results really quick, and then the winners as well.
And I'm loving the comments. Can I just say these people are so smart and so engaged. Holy mackerel.
Honestly, this is one of our most engaged sessions, Lee, and we're so thankful for all the caregivers that are on the line. Just want to quickly announce the winners. Our second winner is going to be Sarah Shaw and Lauren Smith. So you'll see, check the chat box. You'll see my email, where to email me, so we can get that gift card and book over to you. Also, for our poll results, the first one, have you been writing less or more in quarantine, or reading less or more? 66% say more. Do you find it difficult to write down your thoughts or feelings? 66% again say yes. So hopefully with Lee's advice, it will be a little easier for all of us to get started. And Lee, we're definitely going to take you up on a second one, because this was incredible. And I'll let Jennifer and you both close us out a bit, because I know we're a little over time, but I'm sure our participants are eager to hear more and a closing from you both. So thank you.
Lee, I can't thank you enough for joining us today, and not only sharing your tips and tricks, but telling us about some of the really hard times during your life, and talking about things like preserving your loved one's dignity, or sharing your intimate feelings during your times of trauma. I mean, those are difficult things to do. So I'm very appreciative, and I know our audience is as well, that you've joined us. And also, we're super appreciative of all the advocacy that you do for caregivers, for families who've been impacted by war wounds, and for those of us who are caring for aging loved ones. I mean, your voice matters, and we want to thank you for being here.
Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. And if there's just one line to leave you guys with, it's just, there are no rules. So just start writing.
That's it. There you have it, folks. There are no rules. Well, we do kind of have one rule. We want to encourage everybody that was on today's webinar who is a military and veteran caregiver to please join our Facebook group that's just for caregivers of wounded, ill, and injured veterans and active duty service members as well. It's called Hidden Heroes Caregiver Community. You can register and learn more about it by visiting hiddenheroes.org/register. And we also want to invite you to not only follow the Elizabeth Dole Foundation on our social media sites, but also to follow Wounded Warrior Project, because that's how you find out about really cool offerings like today's show featuring Lee Woodruff. So we hope you'll connect with us in those ways. You can simply find us at Elizabeth Dole Foundation on Facebook. That's how you can get started. And if you're looking for Wounded Warrior Project, they're at Wounded Warrior Project. Now, be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us with a recording of today's webinar, along with some of the information that Lee has shared, and also information about our next webinar. We're always open to suggestions, so feel free to email info@elizabethdolefoundation.org. And I just want to make sure that everyone here knows that we're here for you. If you have a concern, if you need help finding a resource, please connect with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. And to that end, we hope you've found today informative and inspirational and a little bit fun. And we hope to stay in touch. And for everyone here, I just want to say thank you. And until next time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, all of our participants.